Hey, this is a little awkward. It's not a Friday. I'm not in my film studio. I don't have my fancy film equipment with me, but I still wanted to give you a little bit of a final video for the year. So instead of a regular Friday checkout where I go over all the things that happened last week in the world of tech, I thought about doing a 2020 checkout where I'd go over everything, the biggest trends that happened in the last year. I actually pick 3 sort of meta trends that I think have defined the year. Then I'll give you 3 little highlights that I thought were personally interesting. And at the end, I'll do predictions. Also 3 wild predictions for the future. So if that sounds like fun to you, then welcome to the 2020 checkout. Alright, let's start with meta trend number 1, the chip business being turned on its head completely. For over a decade, Intel, Nvidia, Qualcomm, and Apple were clear, unchallenged category leaders on their respective devices, from servers to PCs to phones, with very little change in hierarchies, but in 2020, the entire industry got turned on its head. Apple ditched Intel chips in their MacBooks for their homegrown M1 chips, AMD beat Intel on both PCs and servers, Amazon released its second-generation ARM processors for servers, while Microsoft has started working on their equivalent of that too, MediaTek overtook Qualcomm as the largest vendor of mobile SoCs, Samsung's Exynos processors started catching up to Qualcomm on the high end, Nvidia bought ARM in arguably the most significant chip acquisition in maybe ever, Huawei's Kirin chip business basically collapsed overnight as they were cut off from the global supply chains, and commercially successful chips based on the RISC-V instruction set were introduced to the market. Basically, after a decade of slow and steady progress, everything got turned on its head in the chip industry this year, and I think there are 4 main underlying reasons for this change. First, ARM chips have been increasing their performance at a much faster rate than x86 chips for a long while now, and even though they started from a much lower base, this year they have become viable replacements in more power-intensive machines. Second, contract manufacturers, and especially TSMC, became so good at manufacturing chips that they lifted up all of their clients, including Apple, Qualcomm, MediaTek, and AMD, well past the likes of Intel, who builds their own chips. Third, processing has increasingly moved away from the main CPU to everything else on the chip, from AI coprocessors, hardware acceleration, and various software layers. So companies like Intel that have built their entire business on pure CPU performance have been hurt. And fourth, the trade wars and the deglobalization of technology, which is actually my second big sort of meta trend of the year. For decades, we have sort of assumed that technology is just inherently global. I mean, a device like this, which, yes, by the way, I'm absolutely recording the audio of this video with, it was maybe designed in Korea, built in China with components from Taiwan, an operating system from the US, and running apps from Sweden or something like that. We thought that both the internet and the global hardware supply chains would just go across borders, with some notable exceptions, of course. But in 2020, all of that came to a screeching halt. The US doubled down on its trade war with China and in an unprecedented move showed that they are even willing to force non-US companies to stop supplying Chinese players as well. China, of course, scrambled to build up its own domestic tech sector so it didn't have to rely on imports as much. India banned hundreds of apps, mostly from China, causing a massive drop in not only the usage of those apps, but also a sudden halt of Chinese investments into the country's startup ecosystem. India also doubled down on raising tariffs to bolster its Make in India strategy, especially for manufacturing electronics like smartphones domestically. Russia passed a law requiring all phones and computers sold in the country to come pre-installed with a selection of Russian apps. And the European Union has also proposed legislation in the form of the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act that might start peeling it off the rest of the internet even more. In other words, the internet became a lot more fractured and a lot more sort of regional in a sense, and these really complex global supply chains have started following not only their usual goals of efficiency and quality and price, for example, but also increasingly political safety. Okay, meta trend number 3 is global recognition that big tech needs to be regulated. The European Union has of course long been trying to regulate tech giants and has continued to do so this year as well, but for the first time since maybe the 90s, we started to see the United States government as well as the Chinese government join the fun as well. There were the famous antitrust hearings in the US, of course, where lawmakers were grilling the big four tech companies, even if a little clumsily. Various US agencies then recently sued Facebook to spin off Instagram and WhatsApp. There was the famous call of Epic and Spotify and the like to force Apple to allow users to install apps from outside the App Store. And even China blocked the IPO of its most promising fintech company called Ant Financial, and recently even launched an unprecedented anti-monopoly probe against Alibaba, one of the country's most important tech companies by far. And while the specific goals and methodologies might vary quite a lot between these countries, 2020 was the year when politicians around the world realized pretty much the same thing. These tech giants, they're so big, they're so powerful, they pose such systemic risks that there need to be some guardrails to protect against the negative externalities. Alright, those were my 3 sort of meta trends of the year. Now let's move on to my 3 quick highlights of the year. As my first highlight, I'll have to talk about new form factors. 2020 was clearly the year of new form factors, from foldables to the dual screen Surface Duo and even the swiveling LG Wing. In just 1 year, they went from completely janky to absolutely usable. And according to Counterpoint, foldables alone have sold over 2.8 million units already. That is still small potatoes, but it's already become a billion-dollar industry in just a year, and its rate of growth and improvement are incredibly impressive. My second highlight has to be the Oppoification of OnePlus. From one of the founders, Carl Pei, leaving the company, to OnePlus embracing its own software skin, announcing multiple ultra-budget phones with only 1 year of software support, and so on, it's become clear that the company wants to go mainstream, it wants to sell to mass-market users, not just enthusiasts, and it no longer wants to have slim profit margins. And highlight number 3 will be a personal one for me, and that is the progress we've made with Crrowd, the gadget review app that I've been building with my team for a while now. In 2020, together with our fantastic community, we have created a database of almost 8,000 products, up to date and neatly categorized. We've received hundreds of thousands of reviews and answers to product questions, meaning that we've managed to pass even many large retailers, and we've done so while maintaining a high level of quality through our weekly tech knowledge quizzes as well. Oh, and we've just managed to ship dark mode at the end of the year too. So thanks to the Crrowd community for an incredible year. Alright, and now on to predictions. And just a word of warning, I don't like safe predictions. I think they're boring and kind of defeats the whole purpose of trying to predict anything anyway. I like wild predictions, so I'm gonna make some of those now. And that means obviously you're gonna probably disagree with some of these, and obviously I might end up being wrong about some of these, but let's take a look. Prediction 1. macOS will more than double its market share in the next 2 years, from the 6 to 7% of new sales it currently has to over 15%. The new Apple chips and Macs are simply in a class of their own, even on the first try. Apple's rate of progress year over year has been faster than anyone else's in the chip industry, so this gap will only widen in the future. And Microsoft simply has nothing in their pipeline to make Windows on ARM competitive, neither in terms of chips nor on the software side. And given that the Windows ecosystem is also just way more complex and bigger and slower to move than macOS anyway, I think that even if they have the perfect chip and the perfect software, it will still take them 2 to 3 years to get everyone on board as well. So I think over the next couple of years, other than gamers and enterprise customers, for example, who are locked into a specific operating system, pretty much everybody else who just wants a computer, a thin and light device, for example, they will take a long hard look at macOS, and many of them will switch. Okay, prediction number 2. Exactly 1 year ago, I predicted that by 2021 we'd have good foldable flagships under $1,000, but after seeing just how much progress there's been this year alone, and after seeing how many new entrants there will be from Oppo to LG to Xiaomi next year, I now think I was being conservative. I think every major Android phone maker will have at least one foldable or rollable or whatever other form factor in the next year. I think we'll start to see good foldables under $800 next year, and I think we'll see sales triple to around 10 million units. And my third prediction is that politics will enter the tech industry in full force over the next few years. With both hardware and software becoming a public utility and private companies posing serious systemic trade and national security risks all over the world, I think governments everywhere will jump in to regulate the sector, much like they have done with the banks, pharma companies, energy suppliers, and so on. Okay, those were my predictions for 2020, and just for fun, here's a summary of my predictions from a year ago. I won't go through them now, but if you want to, you can pause and see what I was right or wrong about last year. Feel free to take a look, and I hope to do one of these every year going forward. Thank you so much for hanging out with me during this crazy year, whether it was on one of my YouTube channels or on the Crrowd app. I really appreciate it. If you want to help me reach a really big milestone, this channel is almost at 50,000 subscribers. If we could reach that milestone before the end of the year, that would be amazing. So if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. And if you haven't checked out the Crrowd app in a while, be sure to give it a try. It is linked down in the description. And especially if you've received any gadgets over the holidays, be sure to remember to actually review them in the Crrowd app. We've added a lot of new product categories, a lot of new devices, so check it out. And I'll see you next year.